Hello, and welcome to People's History Museum's Radical Late event, Climate Change, Migration and the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm Zosha, and I'm one of the programme officers here at People's History Museum, which is a national museum of democracy and home of ideas worth fighting for, and we're based in Manchester city centre. Each year, our programme aims to spread hope and inspire action, and this year, our programme is exploring the theme of migration and has been co-created with a community programme team made up of 6 people whose lives have been shaped by migration. Whilst we all take important steps in collective action to defeat COVID, People's History Museum is working hard to bring people together to inspire hope, positivity and action. We're really excited to be bringing you this event this evening, but before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. This event's a live stream hosted on YouTube Live. If you would like to ask any questions or interact with us throughout, you can use the live chat box next to the video. You'll need to have a Gmail or YouTube account for this. I'll be collating any questions for the Q&A at the end. And just a gentle reminder that all comments can be seen by all viewers on hosts. So to get us started, I'll introduce Kooj, who's chairing the event this evening. Kooj is director of Crossing Footprints, an organisation connecting creativity with issues of human rights, environment and well-being. As a digital artist, filmmaker and creative producer, Kooj artistically interweaves racial justice with climate change. He's also the founding member of the artist collective Virtual Migrants and has won an award for digital arts connecting refugees with climate change. So over to you, Kooj.
Thanks, Osha. Okay, thank you everybody for tuning in today at this in the middle of a difficult time for many of us. Okay, so we're here today to talk about global warming and climate justice in relation to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Climate justice and climate change is a vast area. The Democratic Republic of Congo on its own is a vast area. So we'll see what we can do today to unpack some of this. There's myself, as well as we've got 2 guests. Well, one of them is the person who's leading on this event, to be honest, who's Emmanuela Yogolelo. She's going to be, I'll introduce her in a moment. She's going to talk to us about a number of things to do with Democratic Republic of Congo in general, as well as about how she came into the idea of wanting to talk about climate change and migration. And she contacted me. This event was actually her idea to begin with. She contacted me to try and put this together in a way that was coherent. She had a lot of very important feelings about the subject. And I thought it'd be good to bring in Alex Randall from Climate Outreach. He can talk a bit more about his work perhaps when he comes in later. And he's been working specifically on climate change and migration for many years. His organization have published a number of things. They try and influence policies around the area as well. So that's the people who are going to be here today. What do we mean by climate justice? Let me just try and unpack a couple of basics here, really. I don't want to assume that we're on the same page. Hopefully we are, but climate justice for me is the idea, when we think of the idea that often people talk about, that it's human activity causing global warming. In many ways, that isn't quite correct. It is the activity of some sections of humans, and others are affected unequally. It's the idea that we're all in the same sea, but we're not all in the same boat. And there are vast areas of the world which were self-sufficient and operated sustainable systems, and those areas have historically been aggressively and brutally forced to change their economic systems and feed into the industrial global economy at great detriment to themselves. And the climate change is often seen as something that just adds to that entire process. So the other thing I think I wouldn't mind just mentioning is that when we're looking at Democratic Republic of Congo, it's not one of the kind of iconic countries and areas that we think of when we're talking about climate change. People often think of Bangladesh or the Arctic. You know, there are a number of really obvious areas that come up time and time again. It's often more interesting and possibly gives us a more reliable understanding of climate change and climate justice when we look outside those iconic areas. Democratic Republic of Congo is often not discussed in regards to climate change, but it is often talked about in terms of migration. There's a lot written about migration and Democratic Republic of Congo. It's not easy to find stuff to do with global warming. DRC, which is the shortened version of Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC has a long history of migration, which goes right back to the colonial period. There are many links with the exploitation of resources in the Congo, and it's worth saying, and I think I'll talk to Emmanuela a bit more about this, but the DRC is a very rich area in terms of resources, in terms of culture, in terms of so many things, and I think it's important to say that because we're going to talk about a lot of difficult narratives in regards to DR Congo, and I think for people who are from that area, I think it's really important in honor of those people to recognize that it's a fantastic country in so many ways. So we often start to, when we're doing discussions like this, we often lose sight of that very simple fact. You know, we've got this long history of extraction, which a number of people have come across, and all of those kind of undermine our sense of a very vibrant country in so many ways. Okay, we're going to try and unpack some of that. We're also going to try and unpack people's perceptions of understanding how climate change works in that area and how we might move towards positive change. We're going to begin with some music, courtesy of Amani Creatives, which Emmanuela Yogolelo is a director of. This event was originally going to be a live event, and Emmanuela can explain to us a bit more about how it was originally going to be, and then obviously we're in the format we are today because of the pandemic. After the music, I'll be talking to Emmanuela about the DRC in general, and also about where climate change and global warming is on the radar for people in the DRC and people who have migrated from the DRC and may be living in Europe, including the UK. Then I'll be talking to Alex Randall about, well, I think we'll begin with the basics of climate change and migration so that we've got a few sort of ground threads, and then the three of us will try and put together those threads, all the different threads, and try and focus on how they come together. What does climate change mean for the DRC? And what does that then mean for migration and in general for us here in the UK, as well as for people in Sub-Saharan Africa? And at the end, we'll have some time for a question answer, which will be via the live chat in the YouTube link, as Socia mentioned earlier. So, okay, I'd like to bring in Emmanuela now, first of all. And Emmanuela, perhaps you could just begin by introducing the music that we're about to hear. How did that come about? Maybe you'd like to say a few words about how this event came about.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emmanuela Yogolelo. I'm a singer-songwriter and creative producer. I'm also a qualified community development officer from the University of Bolton. I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I migrated to the UK over 15 years ago now. When I came to the UK, it was back in the times of wars and armed conflict in Congo. So I first came to the UK as an asylum seeker, and years later, I was granted the right to remain. And Tonight, exactly, I'll be sharing with you some of my perspective in terms of the link between migration and climate change. And in general, I'll be talking about climate change from in the context of justice. But before I do that, I'd like us to watch a music performance by my daughter. She just turned 13. She's called Samuella Ganda. She loves singing music very, very much. And she also is interested in the topic of climate change. So currently, Samuella is learning to play piano, bass guitar, ukulele. She also writes her own songs. And recently, she wrote 2 songs about climate change. I think it all started when I was talking about my perspective on climate change, and the first of the people I always share things with are my daughters. So when I was talking to her, she also was talking back to me about what she's learning in school about climate change, her own feelings and opinions. So she decided to write a song about climate change. So that is how those songs came about. So I think before I say any other things, maybe we can watch the music performance. And if our technician is ready, I think we are ready to.
So I'm Samuella. I sing, I write songs, and I play the keyboard. Change is a crisis. I've got a message to cure your blindness here. None of us are perfect, but we can still try our best. Climate change is a crisis. I've got a message to cure your blindness here. None of us are perfect, but we can still try our best. So the first song was about climate change and how we need to act now, because it's been around for a long time, but some people just choose to ignore it and they think that it won't be around anytime soon, but it's been a big thing for a long time and no one's really paying attention to it, so I just wanted to make a song about that. Okay, so the next song was about just it's about not always needing to rely on other people. It's like one day you're gonna grow up and eventually be independent, so you might as well just learn how to do things yourself. And just because you want someone doesn't mean that you need them, and you can do things on your own, and yeah, you can learn to do things yourself. Don't always rely on other people. And yeah.
Talk for hours on end, the ones you'd call the besties of friends, until things changed, until you changed. After that you tried to toss me away, still stayed after you led me astray, but things weren't the same, we weren't the same. And I tried to revive what was left of us, and you made the first move, knowing I didn't know what to do with me and you. But now I'm doing just fine without you. Now I don't need you, no. Now I'm doing just fine. You knew I had good intentions, took a while to learn my lesson. Yeah, it took some time. But that's okay, that's okay, that's alright. I just wasn't ready for it. Yeah, I didn't get no warning. That's okay, that's okay, that's alright. I just wasn't ready for it. Yeah, I didn't get no warning. Comfortable in my own skin, I found my worth. Stood up to the people who treated me like dirt. I had no shame, so then things changed. I'm not the tallest, I'm not the strongest, but what I know is we've all got flaws, yeah. And what's better than the rest, something not to forget. I try and live my life like no one else does. Not always gonna be at the top shelf. Picking yourself up is what helps. Putting yourself first ain't gonna hurt. Cause now I'm doing just fine without you. Now I don't need you, no. Now I'm doing just fine. You knew I had good intentions. Took a while to learn my lesson. Yeah, it took some time. But that's okay, that's okay, that's alright. I just wasn't ready for it. Yeah, I didn't get no warning. That's okay, that's okay, that's alright. Wasn't ready for it. Yeah, I didn't get no warning, no warning. Oh, 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 oh. I'm doing just fine. You knew I had good intentions. Took a while to learn my lesson. Yeah, it took some time.
The next song was about that song was actually about when I went into high school, because high school was really different to primary school. Obviously, I didn't have all my friends there, so I needed to learn how to speak to other people, how to make new friends, because even though you have friends and you make friends, you're not always going to have them for the rest of your life. So you need to learn how to socialize with other people, make friends and stuff like that. So it was about that, how it was like a new thing to me and how it didn't come easily, because in year 7 that was like a hard year for me because I didn't know where I fitted in. So I didn't know who to be friends with. It was just, everything was just so new. And but yeah, I'm fine now and I know what I'm doing, so yeah.
Always the odd one out, doesn't know where she fits in. And so she's searching for some answers, 'cause everybody knows their role and they've all found their goals, but instead she ends up with more questions. Is it me, the way I look, the way I tell my stories, that they not hooked? Am I not good enough for them? She starts questioning, is it me, the way I speak? Maybe it's the fact I'm around 4 feet, but I can't control it. And I thought they'd known this. Find your style. Even if they don't like it, it's not their lives to live. And keep your smile when life isn't the nicest, 'cause you'll find out how hard it gets. Finding your insecurities every day, not knowing they were there in the first place. She's been longing to talk to someone new, holding herself back, thinking they won't like you. Why did she think of herself this way? 'Cause on the outside, no one wants her to change, but in her eyes, she's out of place. Out of place, hide away, she hides away. She don't wanna find her style, 'cause she thinks that they won't like it, and she don't care if it's not their lives to live, yeah. And she can't keep her smile, 'cause life isn't the nicest, and she found out how hard it gets. Find your style. Even if they don't like it, it's not their lives to live. And keep your smile when life isn't the nicest, 'cause you'll find out how hard it gets.
Yeah, another thing that I'd like to do with my music is speak up on topics that people don't know a lot about, because there's a lot of things going on in the world that not everybody knows about. So climate change is one of them, obviously, and like wars, just like political things, all those type of things that people just overlook because they don't really think that it has anything to do with them. So yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. And there are a number of things there that I really like. There were the first song, which was directly to do with climate change in a very simple way. The last song had resonances with somebody trying to be able to fit in, feeling like they don't fit in. And the middle song was about kind of being independent and being able to being able to think independently for themselves. So I really like all of those in their own ways. Emmanuela, perhaps you could take us through how this project was originally going to take place. Originally, that would have been a live event, and now obviously it wasn't a live event, and you've had to play that video. Perhaps you could mention something about that. But I've got a question as well. I know that your daughter will have some influence from being in the UK and being at school to do with climate change. If she was in the DRC, if she was in Democratic Republic of Congo, do you think that she would have a different, different view or interest in perhaps writing songs of that nature?
That question is kind of hard to address, because but I think the way things are at the moment, probably she will be interested in doing the type of things she wants to do, basically connecting her music with the climate change topic, because in Africa, in Congo today, of course, people are becoming more and more aware of climate change because they are being affected anyway. So I don't know if I've answered to your question.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, we'll come back to that in a minute. Could you tell us a little bit more, perhaps, about your own understanding of climate change and how you got interested in the area?
Okay. So maybe I'll answer in my own way your question, if you don't mind that.
Yeah.
So just before the performance, I was saying my name is Emmanuela Yogolelo, and really tonight all I want to do is to share with you guys my perspective on the link between migration and climate change, but also I want to talk about climate change generally in the context of justice. So the country I come from, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is home to the world's second largest tropical rainforest, called Congo Basin. Actually, the Congo Basin extends to other neighboring countries in the central region of Africa, countries like Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, Brazzaville, Gabon, Cameroon, and Central African Republic. So quickly, something about the Democratic Republic of Congo, the country I come from. For me, the Congo is a land of extremes. For example, the Congo is extremely rich in minerals. The mineral wealth of the Congo is such as the current technological advancements, even our comfort, depends on minerals from Congo. Tonight, for example, most of us, or even all of us, will have a smartphone or a laptop. One of the most important ingredients in making a smartphone or a laptop, a computer, or even an airplane or some cars is a mineral called coltan. And currently, the biggest reserve of coltan in the entire world is in Congo. So it could be that the coltan in your smartphone or your computer came from Congo. Now, this same country that is extremely rich in terms of minerals, not long ago was called by the United Nations the world capital of rape, and one of the worst places in the world to be a woman. Because rape has been and is still being used as a weapon of war and terror. So basically, rape is being used to silence Congolese so that they don't talk, or they don't talk against the fact wealth in the country is being looted, so that we don't talk about the fact we don't profit from our wealth, so that we don't talk about how in the process of getting those resources, those minerals, nature in Congo is being destroyed to the extent that the future is kind of compromised. The future not only for youth, but for everybody else. And so it's not a wonder in a country like Congo, between these injustices, you're not fitting in, you're not profiting for what is yours, and in a country in which wars are being created so that minerals could be easily looted, and nature is being destroyed. You don't see any future in that country. There is no hope because everything around you is being destroyed. So it's not wonder people start migrating. And by the way, when Congolese Africans migrate, the majority of people who leave their countries, they don't migrate to the West. The majority of people who leave their country, they are just internal displaced people. They live from one part of their country to another, or they leave one African country to another African country. It's just few of us who migrate to the West. So sometimes the statistic they give out there about numbers of African migrants, Congolese migrants, they are not necessarily true. Another example of the Congo as a land, a country of extremes, it is, you know, when they say tropical rainforests are the lungs of the world. I always have this image of the world as a human being needing two lungs. So it's like one lung for this world human being is the Amazon tropical rainforest in Brazil, and the other lung is the Congo Basin tropical rainforest in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, this same lung of the world has been for over 400 years now, the center stage and the heaven for capitalism, slavery, colonialism, all kinds of injustice, inequality, and criminality. Of course, I won't sit here just talking about bad things about Congo. We do have as well good things, positive things. We have beautiful music, we have good foods, we have brilliant brains, we've got all these minerals. But really for me, when you take good things, positive things about Congo, you put them next to bad things about Congo. Personally, I prefer to talk about what is not going well in the country. Now, going back to our tonight's topic, in Congo, I'm from the eastern region, and precisely I'm from the Kivu region. In that part of the Congo, we live either in or around sections of the tropical rainforest Congo Basin. So it's in that kind of environment I grew up. I was born and I grew up. Growing up personally, I never experienced climate change problems. Not because we didn't have those kind of problems. We did have them. However, they were insignificant. And they were insignificant because, among other things, we inherited from our ancestors way of living in harmony with nature. So it's like we used to get everything we needed from the forest. We cut down trees for cooking, for building. We cleared space for houses, farms, cattle, and so on. However, everything we did it at a small scale. We also did things just to some extent. And then afterwards, people did a number of things to help nature heal, bounce back and find balance again. So when I read headlines or I hear news or some people saying things like, what causing climate change problems in Africa and countries like Congo is mismanagement, corruption, ignorance, and backward practices. I'm seriously lost, I'm confused, I'm speechless, I'm just like, wow. Because definitely we do have cases of mismanagement and corruption, which by the way have to stop. However, for me, put together all these cases of mismanagement and corruption, they don't even make up 5%. 10% of what is causing us to suffer from the impact of climate change. Then another, when they talk about ignorance, like I said, when I was growing up, climate change, problems from climate change, effects of climate change, I never heard people talking about them. They were not a big deal. Not because they were not around, because they were there, but just insignificant. And it's not because I was ignorant or I was not aware of the existence of those problems, because I can clearly remember when I was doing my primary education in primary school, they used to teach us about climate change, environment, replanting tree. I even remember one time I took part in a project which consisted of replanting trees. So it's not about people being ignorant. When people talk about backwards African practices, I simply don't understand. Because like I said, for Africans, centuries and centuries ago, they already learned that their survival depended on nature and how well it is, how they interacted with it. That's the reason why those backward practices, lifestyle, way of being they adopted, it was just to keep being in harmony, interacting in the best way possible in nature. It's not because they couldn't go for different options or they didn't have brain or something. It's just because they understood. That's why they pioneered small scales to big scales, for example, and so on. So for me, really, what's causing climate change problems, whether that is in Congo, in other African countries, in other global South countries, or even anywhere in the world, is capitalism. That's my opinion. Because capitalism doesn't do things on reasonable scales. Capitalism always do things at really big, very big scales. Capitalism doesn't have limits in what it does when it's about amassing minerals, making more profits, gaining more power. They have no limits. So it's no wonder it's like they don't even realize that they are destroying the nature. They don't care. All that matters to them is profits and power. So for me, it's really down to capitalism again, because despite all the money they've got, and this is so contradictory to me, despite all the money capitalism gathers, they don't have in place measures to help nature heal after it has given us what we need. So I think quickly, that's what I can say about the Democratic Republic of Congo, but also my perspectives about the link between migration and climate change, but also just climate change in general in terms of social justice. So I think now, if that's okay, Kooj, maybe you can now rephrase your questions again, please.
Thank you, Emmanuela. That's fantastic. Really well put together. I love the way, I love your kind of the way you describe all those things and the passion that you have. The love for Congo comes out in everything that you say, as well as your description of capitalism as well. I wonder whether you could maybe just say a couple more things specifically to do with the colonial history of Congo, because mineral extraction, as I understand it, has been going on for a very long time, and that was what originally attracted the Belgians to Congo. I think I've read somewhere that the population of Congo, even before it became a proper Belgian colony, when I think it was called the Congo Free State, or the Free State of Congo. And during that period, I believe the population of Congo reduced by half, and there was a practice of cutting local people's limbs to force them to have to switch the kind of economy they had. towards the rubber and other things. So it's a very difficult, and also as far as I understand it, the migration in Congo has always been very strong since colonialism, but it didn't exist before that. So migration is a kind of colonial product. So I don't know whether you'd like to just comment on some of those things.
I think you've already said it so well, and also I tried also to say something. Yeah, like I said, it hadn't started today or yesterday. Over 400 years ago, already Congo was this heaven for capitalists. Like you said, maybe before it was minerals, before it was coltan, it was gold, it was diamonds, it was manganese. I don't know if manganese is even an English word. It was exactly rubber trees. When you talk about the colonial times and people getting their limbs cut because they couldn't provide an amount of that seeds for the Belgians. So exactly, it's always been like that. So all the wealth of Congo, it's kind of, they belong to everybody else, but not to Congolese. And really, the truth is, it doesn't even belong to Africans, because it's no longer a secret that it belongs. It's Westerners who have a monopoly over the wealth of Congo. Since centuries ago, whether it's just rubber seeds, now it's minerals and this and that. So I don't know if I've answered to your question, Kooj.
Thank you. And I suppose the other thing, I just think it's important that people understand what we're talking about when we're thinking of colonial history in Congo, but also the post-colonial history of Congo. Independence in 1961, I think. Then Patrice Lumumba, who all the people from Congo who I've met always say, "Oh, Lumumba, he is our father." You know, he really was the people's. Originally was the people's prime minister and the people's hero, and he's remained that. And in a short space of time, with the support of Western powers, he was taken out, and President Mobutu, Prime Minister Mobutu, was installed instead. That was with the support of the UK and the Belgians and the UN. And and President Mobutu continued the extraction in favor of the Western powers, in favor of multinational companies, and the wars that have come about since to try and get rid of President Mobutu. The first Congolese war, then later on, due to other instabilities that came from that, the second Congolese war. I think I've read something like 5 million people died. I mean, that 5 million, I mean, people argue with numbers. Some people say it's a bit less, some people say it's a lot more. But anyway, it's 5 million is a heck of a lot. People talk about transatlantic slavery as being a process where over the entire continent of Africa, roughly 12 million people, they estimate, maybe 14, over a heck of a long period of time. So within a space of, one and a half decades or something, the idea of 5 million people dying in one single country is astonishing, extremely sad. So I just think that people ought to understand that, the scale of devastation that we're talking about. Is there anything, I'm going to kind of move on to Alex. Is there anything you wanted to come back to, Emmanuela, after I've
I think that's everything I can say for now. Anyway, I'm not an expert like Kooj and Alex. I'm not even an activist, although I'd like to explore climate justice through music and other art form. But yeah, personally, me too, I'd like to listen to
I mean, you say that, but I mean, I think that, I think one of the things with climate change we're all struggling with is what kind of awareness people have got. You've got a strong awareness of capitalism, of migration, of the history of Congo, and you're coming into climate change more recently, although, like you said, you've actually understood the bones of it since you were at school in DRC. I think that's fascinating. And I suppose one last question, which would be, before I move on to Alex, what's your view within the Congolese community in the UK as compared to in, you've mentioned that people are becoming more aware in DRC, but in the UK, what's your view of how people are aware of climate change? And secondly, what priority it's got? Because people are struggling in this country with so many things. Does it feel like it's just not important enough, or do you think people are thinking it's an important thing, or is it a struggle to weigh everything up?
Of course, it's a struggle, but also it's like it's both things. And I always say, personally, for me, one of the best thing I will have gotten from migrating, from leaving my country to another country, is the opening of my eyes and becoming aware to so many realities, or even challenging myself and changing my views of things. So I would say within my Congolese community here in the UK, like myself, people are becoming aware of many different things. So definitely people are becoming aware about climate change, and in new context with new understanding, because there are other side of things we didn't see when we were back home in Congo, but over here we can also see new things and different things. And I think, like most other people, the priority exactly is to try to find a best solution possible, starting by educating ourselves, just changing small behaviors and so on. So people are aware, and people really want to do something. And I think even if when they haven't yet done much, it's a good thing, the fact people have become aware and they are willing, they feel like they want, they need to do something about it.
Thank you so much, Emmanuela. I'm gonna bring in Alex now. Stay with us, Emmanuela, because there may be things that we come back to you on during this next. Well, there definitely will be during this next section. So, Alex Randall from Climate Outreach. I guess the first thing would be if you can introduce what you do and how long you've been doing it, where you've got into this from. And I think it would be good, because I think that the links between climate change and migration, I think, are complex. They're not straightforward, and I think people have been looking at climate change, have cottoned on to the link, but I think that people still don't necessarily kind of have a grasp of how that works, really. So I don't know if we can just begin with some basics, if you introduce yourself, and then just unpack that, some of those basics for us.
Of course. So I run a program that looks specifically at the connections between climate change and migration. So the ways in which our changing climate is going to shift or alter patterns of migration and displacement. And the way that we do that project, the way that we work on this issue, is to work with refugee and migration rights organizations. And rather than just kind of saying, okay, these are the connections, this is how it works, the goal really is to empower refugee and migration organizations to begin to have a voice on climate change, to begin to talk about the ways in which climate change is going to affect the communities that they work with, the ways in which climate change is going to affect the places where they may have to work, the way that it is going to create new and unexpected situations for those civil society organizations, for those charities, for those NGOs, for those community organizations that will be dealing with these new patterns of migration and displacement that climate change is going to bring. So that's the project, and how it works and what it does. And I think, Kooj, you wanted us to go a bit into some of the ways that actually happens, right? Like some of the ways that the changing climate is shifting patterns of mobility. Is
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. So, I mean, should we get into that now?
Yeah, if you could just
Yeah.
obviously it's a vast area.
It's
completely
huge.
understand that, but if you can just give you know, maybe dispel a few myths, for example,
right,
and just say, you know, and maybe just give people a feel of where we're at now, you know, with trying to unpack it. Yeah.
So I think one of the best ways to look at it is actually to kind of to tap into this idea that Emmanuela described so powerfully earlier on, which is that people are part of the environment, right? We're not different things. We're not separate. Like humans and the environment are all part of the same thing. And you know, that can feel strange to people who feel very detached from nature, but it's true nonetheless. But what that means is that when the environment changes, people respond to that in all sorts of different ways. And one of the ways that people react, one of the ways that humans and societies and communities, however you want to look at it, one of the ways that people react to the changing environment is by moving, it's by migrating. And that has been true throughout human history. As bits of the environment have changed, as things have altered, people have reacted to that in all sorts of different ways, including by moving from one place to another, right? That's in some ways been like part of human history for the whole time that we've been on the planet. And what we see with climate change is new and unprecedented levels of environmental change, right? All sorts of things are shifting, all sorts of things are altering. Patterns of droughts are changing, droughts are becoming longer and more intense. Patterns of disasters are changing. We're seeing more powerful and more intense hurricanes and typhoons. We're seeing rainfall patterns shift and change, and that affects where it's possible to farm, what can be grown. It changes patterns of flooding, right? So there are all of these ways in which the carbon emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions that we have put into the atmosphere are changing the world around us, changing the environment, changing, you know, where we live. And one of the ways people are already reacting to those changes is through mobility, is through migration, right? So I think it would be a mistake to imagine that migration caused by climate change is something that is, you know, way off in the future. It's going to happen in several decades if we don't stop climate change. Like, no, this is happening now, not necessarily in the ways that people always expect, but nonetheless, the changes in the climate that we've already seen, the impacts of climate change that we're already witnessing, have already started to shift and change patterns of migration and displacement.
Okay, thanks. I wonder if you can just comment on two things. One is that I've often read people say that that migration is likely to be the biggest effect of climate change on human beings. If you can respond to that statement.
Yeah.
And secondly, whether what we're talking about in terms of climate change, in terms of migration, what sort of distances and area, you know, what are we talking about? You know, is it people just migrating to the next village or next street, or is it people going to different continents, or right, you know, what does it mean?
Yeah, so I think one of the really useful ways to understand this is to begin by thinking about the kinds of changes that we're going to see, and to kind of pick a couple of them and then look at the way they reshape patterns of mobility, patterns of migration, patterns of displacement. And one way of doing that is we can just begin with an example. So we could say, well, what happens when droughts become longer and more intense? And when that happens, very commonly, the result is that people who work in agriculture, people who rely on agriculture for their income, or you know, rely on agriculture actually for the food that they eat, are put in a position where the surplus from farming can no longer support them financially, and they then have a choice. They can stay where they are and they can try and adapt. They can try and cope with that drought, or they can move. And very often, when people move, what they're trying to do is replace that lost income. They're looking for another job. They're looking for work somewhere else where they can replace the lost income that their household has experienced. And what that usually entails is moving the shortest distance possible, right? Like if you can find alternative work nearby, then that is going to be easier, safer, cheaper. That's how people will respond. So very often what we see is increased levels of drought, or the severity of drought, adding to this existing global trend of urbanization, right? Cities are growing, more people are living in cities compared to people living in the countryside. And climate change and its impacts are one of the forces that is driving that urbanization. It's meaning that people increasingly are leaving the countryside for all sorts of climate-related reasons, and they are going to cities in order to find work. And that does two things, and you know, and it can be a real mix of positives and negatives. And I think that's a really key thing to understand, is that for many people who make those journeys, yeah, there are increased risks. They're going to cities that they maybe haven't been to before, where they don't have they don't have family, they don't have community, they don't have those connections. They're not necessarily able to access education or healthcare. You've got very often you've got like young people migrating without their parents. So there's, it can be incredibly risky. It can be incredibly dangerous. But what you also have is people who are leaving, then able to replace some of that lost income, that lost livelihood, and potentially send money back to the household, to the family that they've left, and begin to provide some security for that family as the environment, as the climate changes around them. So it's complicated. I don't think we can say that these shifting, changing patterns of mobility are always good or always bad. We end up in this complex situation where people's experiences are very, very different. Some people have kind of very difficult, very traumatic experiences during those kinds of migration. For other people, it's a way of escaping somewhere that has become dangerous, become difficult to live in, has become a poverty trap, and it is a way of escaping that, and it's positive. I think the key thing that we have to, the key takeaway from that is that in all of our conversations, all of our discussions about what to do about this, we can't sit and think, okay, well, let's just, let's stop climate change and problem solve. I mean, yeah, of course we should like do everything we can to halt climate change, but people are already moving, right? This is already happening. So it's also absolutely vital that firstly, we make that migration safe, we make it legal, we make it so that people aren't exposed to unnecessary risks as they do it. And secondly, that people are able to harness migration as a way of coping with climate change. People are able to use it. People are able to kind of deploy it as a strategy for dealing with some of the worst impacts of climate change. And potentially even that we look at ways in which patterns of migration that are safe and legal could be facilitated, that we could be looking at how to harness migration, how to harness mobility as a way of adapting to climate change.
And in terms of where people migrate to in practice, what, if you can just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think the key thing to remember is, at the moment, most of this kind of new pattern, these new altered patterns of mobility, most of this is internal, right? Most of this is people moving within their own country, not crossing international borders. And that's for all sorts of reasons. The first one is that when people move in this context, they're looking to move somewhere that isn't too far, because who wants to go like hundreds or thousands of miles away from their family? Okay, I mean, maybe some people do, maybe some people have the the spirit of adventure, but mostly people don't want to be far from their friends, their family, their community. So there is little desire to deal with lost income, say from drought, by moving thousands of miles, right? It would be far better, cheaper, safer, easier to move the shortest possible distance. So that's why people tend to move short distances and tend to move internally. The other key thing that we need to look at is this pattern of migration connected to drought is not, of course, the only one that is happening. What we're also seeing is a change in the frequency and intensity of what we call sudden onset disasters, right? So things that just arrive very quickly, typhoon strikes, hurricanes, cyclone strikes, flash flooding, all of these things, the pattern of them and the intensity of them is changing due to climate change. And those create patterns of displacement, which we see, we've known about for centuries. But again, people who experience that kind of devastation and experience that kind of displacement very often want to return as soon as possible, right? There isn't a wish to leave their home permanently and go to another country or go to another continent. Very often people are displaced. Their wish is to get out of a displacement camp or an evacuation center as soon as possible and return home to try and be involved in reconstruction, to rebuild their home, to get their business back on track, to try and put their life and their community back together. So again, what you see is the impacts of climate change creating patterns of mobility, which very often are short distance, very often internal. People aren't crossing international borders. And I think that, what that means is that we need to get away from this idea, this narrative that climate change is going to drive millions of people across international borders, across continents. Actually, at the moment, it's not. It's creating new patterns of internal migration and displacement, and it is those new patterns of internal movement that we need to be thinking about. And it is those people who are moving internally, who it's their welfare that we need to think about. It's, in a way, it's a kind of distraction to begin kind of picturing these apocalyptic scenes of people moving thousands of miles. That's just not that right now. That's not the reality.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really clear. I'm just wondering whether we could also talk about just for a moment talk about migration and DR Congo and its link with conflict and the long history of that. And as I mentioned before, we should always remember that this is a phenomenon which has taken place, as a result of onsetting from colonialism and so on. But yeah, in terms of, there's this kind of chain, even with conflict, that most people don't travel very far. There are people who travel over the border. There's a lot of internally displaced people within Congo. There's also people just in the neighboring countries. Congo has also been a place where people, for example, during the Rwandan genocide, a lot of people, went to Congo itself were displaced and became refugees in Congo. That it's been an area with all kinds of and the rich, if you like, that's perhaps the wrong word, but very high intensities and a large scale of migration in that region generally. And then on top of that, you've got, within that region, then you've got this kind of chain that gradually means that a relatively small proportion end up in Europe. And that's kind of fairly well understood if you research migration in DR Congo or, in relation to conflict. There's lots written about that. It's very difficult to find any of those sort of people who have studied that, who also include even the smallest section related to climate change within that migration scenario. And I don't know whether you can just comment on how that might be playing out, how climate change might be playing out in Congo, in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, how that might impact on regional, as well as this chain through to European countries. And possibly you might want to bring in, I know you've done work around conflict and climate change in areas such as Syria, for example. There may be ideas that you might, well, I know that there's a lot of myths that had to be dispelled to do with Syria, but there are some understandings about how they interact generally that you might be able to apply to Democratic Republic of Congo. And so we'll bring Emmanuela back in after that as well. So I think she may have things to reflect on as well. Okay.
Of course. Right. So I think the key thing to remember is if we recall Emmanuela's statement at the beginning about the levels of armed conflict and violence in DRC, I think that's really, really important, is to understand that the displacement in DRC, so we're talking about internal displacement here, right? People moving, being forced to move within DRC, and people who have left DRC to other countries, and people who have come from other countries into DRC. Mostly it's conflict, violence, oppression, human rights violations that is driving all of that movement. That's the key thing to understand. This isn't mobility that is driven by climate change, okay? But that doesn't mean that climate change is irrelevant to this picture for several reasons. And I think the first one is that it is very often people who are already displaced, right? So people who are living in temporary shelters, people who are living in refugee camps, people who are living in internal displacement camps, in all those different forms of insecure accommodation. Those are the people very often in a country who are most at risk when it comes to all of these other climate-driven impacts. Those are the people who are most at risk from flooding, from extreme weather events, from all those kinds of sudden disasters. Those are people who are already in very, very vulnerable situations. And when we add into that equation various kinds of climate-driven hazards, that vastly worsens the situation, right? So we're not talking about climate change necessarily causing that mobility, causing that displacement, causing that migration. We're talking about the ways in which climate change driven events may now be adding to the vulnerability, adding to the difficulty, adding to the situation that many displaced people in DRC are in. So I think that's the key connection to understand here. And in a lot of situations, what you often find is patterns of successive displacement. So for example, where a group of people may initially be displaced by violence, by conflict, and will move to somewhere to escape that and settle there for a short amount of time, but in making that move are then in a location which is highly exposed to some other kind of disaster, some other kind of environmental force, some other kind of climate-driven event, and will then be displaced again because of that. And that, in a way, that's quite common, because of course, when people are forced to move, forced to find somewhere else to stay, forced to find somewhere else to live, very often people have to settle in locations which other people aren't living in. And very often people aren't living in those locations because they frequently flood, or they're kind of known to be vulnerable to some other kind of environmental force. So you get this pattern of displacement where people move initially because of violence and conflict, and then are displaced again by flooding, for example. And that's another pattern that we see unfolding in DRC.
Thank you for that, Alex. I'm wondering whether, Emmanuela, if you're there, could we bring you back in? I think there are some things that, because I know you've told me, I've known you for a long time now, and I know that you've talked to me sometimes about some of the work that you do in supporting, for example, women who have been, as a result of conflict, women who have experienced rape, and who may be in camps. And I think one of the things that Alex is saying is that it's people who are in camps. I don't know whether there's a disproportionate number of women who are actually in the area, because it often tends to be the men initially who migrate. I'm hearing that there are people who are in camps who are more likely to be affected by climate change. So I don't know what your feelings are, what your comments might be about some of the things that Alex is talking about.
I don't think I have much to add, because I agree with Alex in everything he's been saying. But actually, I don't think it's a statement, not even an opinion. Maybe it's just a question in my process of learning well about this climate change topic. I'd like to ask to yourself or to Alex, the way I see things, definitely I agree. It's not all the problems that are directly linked to climate change. Some problems are simply linked to conflict. However, personally, the way I see, it's bizarre. It's like everything is connected, because it starts with some people are looking for these minerals, for these resources, these raw materials. Then they not only they create wars in order to easily get those resources, but in the process of getting them, they destroy nature, creating some imbalancements, which in the end, we always end up in some kind of climate change problems. Could you help me a little bit? Like I said, it's just I want to understand and I'm learning.
Right. I mean, I think that's it, right? I think you've explained it. Like, I'm not sure that there's like a kind of additional explanation that I need to give there. Like that's exactly it.
I guess Alex, I just if it's right, I'd like to make sure people don't just understand it's conflict leading to migration, right, but it's more than that. The conflict destroy nature, bring about this climate change, then we end up in migration. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, no, you're
where what you're saying, Emmanuela, is really important, because I think that the combination of that there are forces which are doing both things. There are forces which are involved in conflict. Conflict is so closely related to the resources and the extraction and the even if it's not directly conflict, but that it's involved in the people, including, for example, China now, the Belgian and other multinational corporations who are extremely interested to preserve their ability to keep extracting resources from Congo. And part of that interest is to continue the instability of the Congolese to be able to control their own resources, to have their own sovereignty over their resources. And it is the same kind of process that is also relates to environmental destruction. There's so much mining that's going on in Congo, for example, as you mentioned, coltan, and the way that's done isn't in a environmentally friendly way, together with the other thing, which is where the climate in Congo is affected by industrialization in all kinds of parts of the world. So I think that you saying that actually these things are very difficult to actually separate, and they're not actually separable, I would say. So I think that's really important. I know the other thing I'd like to ask you, perhaps Emmanuela, and maybe Alex has got a handle on this, is that when we look at environmental damage, well, in terms of colonial damage, people often talk about reparations. There's a big movement, particularly amongst African diaspora, to discuss reparations as a result of colonialism. I know that there is a climate version of that, climate change version of that, which is to do with the loss and damage, which I'm very interested in, which is to do with the loss and damage being caused to countries because of climate change, and whether or not there is any interest amongst people from Congo to try and look at reparations and look at what is owed to them. So, for example, the costs of migration, the cost of people having to lose their homes, to have to move somewhere else. At the moment, if you are coming to the UK whether you're wherever you're having to go to, surely somebody is responsible somewhere for that having to have happened, and maybe they owe you something to support you. So I mean, basically, that in a nutshell, that's what that means really. And maybe there should be a legal right that you have to claim that support from whoever's caused you the distress to have to move. So those are some of those are the questions that I often kind of grapple with myself. So I don't know, Emmanuela, what's your feeling about that? And then I know Alex is going to have a few things to say about that, but I'd really like your points of view on that, Emmanuela.
So personally, I don't know much about this new area of climate reparation, but straight away I can agree. I think something like that needs to exist, needs to happen. And when people are talking about these different reparation, whether it's because reparation about slavery, colonialism, climate change, personally, I always say it's not just to ask reparation, just to ask for reparation. I think what is important, and also it's not even just because someone caused some people to migrate, to lose this and that, but really also people should focus on how what happened, these injustices, these inequalities, crimes that happened, they create the system in which we exist today. So if there is injustice, inequality, impunity, some think they are superior, others are inferior. Exactly, for me, that will be my argument. It's not just reparation for reparation because you caused me this, but it's linked to the system, the system we are struggling with today. This system of injustice and equality. It's, for me particularly, it's because of that. And so, yes, I agree that there should be some kind of climate reparation as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. Alex, what would you like to come in on that as well?
Yeah, I think I'd like to, I mean, I agree with Emmanuela. I think you, of course, of course there should be compensation. Of course there should be kind of, financing, however you want to frame it. But it's also true that the driving forces, the underlying causes behind that displacement, that destruction, that injustice need to be changed as well. Otherwise, okay, there can be compensation, there can be reparation, but if nothing has changed apart from that, then it will just go on and on. And I think I think there's a really interesting kind of process going on at the moment about how this compensation, how this idea of compensation or reparation is dealt with at the international level. And at the moment, what you have is a lot of countries, developing countries in the global south, who are already experiencing the sharp end of those climate change impacts, looking at what it is costing their country to cope with them, not even thinking about the human cost, the lives, the ill health, the injury, the distress, the mental health issues, right? Literally looking at how many hundreds of millions of dollars dealing with climate change is costing them. And included in that is the costs to a country of displacement, right? Displacement is expensive. All of those people who are forced from their homes, suddenly they need assistance, they need help, they're very often, it's destroyed their business, it's destroyed, their livelihood, right? That is an absolutely astronomical cost. And quite rightly, those governments are saying, well, why is this cost accelerating? Why is it going up, right? And they are, they're making the case that many of these increased costs are a result of climate change. And then quite rightly, they are saying, well, it's not their carbon emissions, right, that have caused that climate change. The carbon emissions of the countries which are currently the richest, which have been wealthy for a long time, which burnt the oil, burnt the gas, and benefited from that long history of burning fossil fuels, which ultimately are responsible for the destruction and the costs that those countries are seeing now. And they are saying, to the wealthier countries, you have to pay for this. And I think just a simple understanding of fairness, I think, means that they're right.
Okay, we've it's about just gone 7:20 now, and I think we're aiming to finish around 7:30. But I don't know whether there's any questions in the chat or any other questions from any people who are watching. If there are, please put them in the chat now if you haven't already. And Zosha, are you able to come in and give us some idea if you're watching this, and give us some idea whether there's any questions we should respond to?
Yeah, so we've had one question here, which is about what your thoughts are on how COVID-19 has shaped climate-induced migration and displacement, and what the new restraints or approaches and possibilities are with that.
Okay, that's an interesting question. Okay, would you like to talk about that to begin with, Alex? I guess that's thrown into your. I think that I can expand it in other ways. I can reinterpret it in a moment, but perhaps you could begin with that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so two really key things. Firstly, is millions and millions of people who have moved as a way of protecting their livelihood, right? Say from drought, for example, have been earning money and sending that money back to their family as a way of replacing the lost livelihood, helping the family that they have left. And what COVID has done is forced lots and lots of urban centers into lockdown. And that means that millions of those people have had their livelihood in that city destroyed. And that means that they're no longer sending the money back to the family, which is potentially in a kind of highly climate vulnerable area. So it's kind of cut off this source of finance, which was flowing from cities into climate vulnerable areas. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we all understand the measures that are necessary to try and prevent the spread of COVID-19. But what we've seen over 2020 is, like every year, obviously, there were disasters that involve evacuation, involve getting people out of harm's way, and doing those kind of evacuations in the context of a pandemic where you're trying to maintain social distancing, has become incredibly difficult. And I'm sure that people have been unnecessarily exposed to COVID infection because they've had to be involved in an evacuation, or because they've had to stay in temporary accommodation where there isn't enough space, they can't do social distancing properly, you don't have access to proper facilities to kind of wash their hands and all the rest of it. So yeah, these things have collided for sure.
Okay, one thing that's also happened during well, actually, Zosha, are there any other questions that we have? Hello, Zosha. Okay.
No, there's not another question on the live chat. So if anyone does want to pop one in, yeah, we can come back to it.
Okay. I'll just we've still got a few minutes, so I'll just bring in one thing that's happened during lockdown is that finally people have started to, in a way which hasn't happened before, look at challenge racial injustice, and I think that's been very interesting and very important. For the first time, people are talking about how that is the first time that white communities have really, in a large scale, mass way, looking at racial injustice. What began as something called Black Lives Matter, which is still continuing as Black Lives Matter, I think is gradually becoming a much more broader movement. And obviously, when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, when I was, the idea of people in Congo, 5 million people having died, and the amount of displacement that we're talking about as a colonial byproduct, or as a necessary part of colonialism, and the post-colonial or neo-colonial state of affairs there, is another form of, we have to recognize that Black lives do matter, not just because of police brutality in the Western countries. So I think it's a very good example of those things, but also in terms of climate change, the disproportionate effects of climate change on people in Sub-Saharan Africa in particular is very very stark, really, when you look at it. And I think that in countries such as Democratic Republic of Congo, we haven't quite got the level where people are understanding that as a racial justice issue. I think that it would be good to sort of, and I personally think that that's something to do with quite a brain shift that people are doing, because climate change is something that isn't seen, is sort of falls within a very European framework. It feels in the UK and in media, in large scale media discussions, it tends to be not a global South issue. And I think that both for Black activists and racial justice activists, as well as for people within the climate movement, it's important to start to try and change the dynamic on some of that. I know that, Emmanuela, you've talked to me in the past about how you felt that when we're thinking of the environmental movements, that it feels very European. I don't know, perhaps you'd like to give some sort of, explain some of your feelings about that.
So really not much to say about that. Like you said, really personally, when I look at the current climate movement, it's just white middle class. Not only it look white middle class, but with that eternal Eurocentric and paternalistic attitudes, thinking they know best, they should take final decisions. So it's no wonder current climate movement, really it's not representative. It doesn't even reflect the different experiences we have about climate change or the different opinions. Because another thing I believe is, although climate change is a global crisis, but it's something we live, it's something we experience differently based on which part of the world you are in. And straight away, it means we'll have different views about it, we'll have different priorities. And we need all those differences around the same table, because it's already been proven how very often our differences exactly is the magic, is the secret, is the strength. We shouldn't be afraid of our differences, because in most cases, they turn out to be exactly the solution to problems we are facing commonly. So I think those are other things I could have added on top of what I've already said.
Thank you. Alex, is there anything you'd like to, I mean, we're more or less out of time, but if there's anything you'd like to add to that That would be
I agree
really
with I agree with Emmanuela. I'll like to give her the last word on that.
great. Okay. Okay, I suppose the last thing to do now is to thank everybody for coming. I don't know whether Alex or Emmanuela, you've got any things coming up that you'd like to tell people who are tuning in, any events coming up or any actions. Maybe I'll begin just with an event that an artist collective, Virtual Migrants, which I'm a member of, that we're involved in something called Dance the Guns to Silence, which is an online event on Saturday, and that's to commemorate the Ogoni 9 in Nigeria, the murder of Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 other people from the Ogoni people of Nigeria. The actual date, the anniversary date for that, 25 years, was 2 days ago on the 10th. And the commemoration is going to take place as a special event online on Saturday. So please do tune in. If you want some more information about that, either you can Google it or you can go to the Virtual Migrants website, and it'll be in the blog or it'll be on the homepage, the links to that. So that's a really important event. There are a number of things a number of different organizations doing short performances and talks and so on. So that's on Saturday. Have you got anything, Alex or Emmanuela, that you'd like to bring up?
Maybe just to say, with Amani Creatives, which is a collective of local artists from local African communities and other artists of African genre, we will be producing a kind of digital festival or digital showcase in which you can experience art, culture from local African communities. So we don't know exactly when these digital showcases will go live on the internet, but if you just keep Google, you just Google, YouTube, Facebook, everywhere on the internet, here and they just search for Amani showcases, Amani Go Digital, something like that. So you'll have available those art showcases. So I think that's what I can say.
Thanks. Alex, is there anything you'd like to announce?
Sure. So we've got a few things coming up. The easiest way to find out about those is to sign up to our newsletter. So if you Google Climate Migration Coalition, click on the newsletter, put your email in, we'll send you all the info.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Emmanuela, and to Alex. And also I'd like to thank People's History Museum, Zosha, who on behalf of People's History Museum set this up and organized it. Also, there's a person who nobody's seen here today, which is who's a guy supporting us with the tech, really, Kieran. Thank you, Kieran, as well. And thank you all for tuning into this, and stay safe, I guess, is the standard thing a lot of people are saying, which is quite important. And thank you and goodbye, really. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
So I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and I hope you agree that it's been a really interesting and thought-provoking evening, and I'd like to thank Kooj for chairing tonight, and Emmanuela and Alex for sharing their knowledge and experience with us, as well as Samuela's recorded performance. So please check out People's History Museum's upcoming online events as well. Our next Radical Late in December is an opportunity to meet activists who are working locally to end immigration detention. We've also got upcoming family-friendly sessions, and all of the details and booking information are on our website, which is phm.org.uk. Whilst we all take important steps and collective action to defeat COVID-19, People's History Museum is working hard to still bring together people to inspire hope, positivity and action. And even though our buildings are closed at the moment, our work's never felt so relevant. So if you are able to support us by making a donation, joining our radical campaigns or sharing our content online, it would be really appreciated. Thank you everyone again for joining us.